Oh, thank you, lights. So I can't see the rest of you. So I'm Angel. I was born in Hong Kong. My family and I, we immigrated to the US, to Philadelphia, when I was 8 years old. I grew up in South Jersey, in a town where there weren't a lot of immigrants. My family wanted us to assimilate, to feel right at home in a suburban Jersey town, and to feel like everyone else, to feel American. That didn't really work, of course. As a teenager, I was a difficult child. I rebelled. I knew I was different, and I wanted to understand why I was different, but I didn't know what it was. And then in college, I decided to study Mandarin Chinese. I majored in international studies. A few years later, I got a master's degree in geography. As an adult, I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 10 years, and then I moved to El Salvador. It was only a few years ago that I came back to this area and landed in New York City area. The best way I could explain my condition is this. My restless self was struggling with finding my belonging. I didn't know where I was from, really. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where home was. And so I think it makes sense, actually, that I decided to choose a career in international humanitarian aid work. My work is in public health, global public health, and I work mostly in Africa and Asia. My work is at the intersection of public health and social justice. I work in disease programs that help or try to help those that are poorest in the world. I'm talking about HIV/AIDS, elephantitis. Yes, that still exists. Soil-transmitted diseases like hookworm and Ebola. For almost 2 decades, I threw myself into this work thinking that that's where I could really contribute. Now, that's not to say that I didn't do anything back home. I would volunteer at soup kitchens, and then during election years, I would help fundraise for local Democratic candidates, and I would also help phone bank. I voted. Then November 2016 elections. I knew I wanted to do just a bit more. The political rhetoric at the time was awful, and the thought that Trump might be elected president was completely unthinkable. So, the weekend before the elections, I decided to travel to Philadelphia to phone bank for Hillary, of course, yes. Sorry. because I learned that Pennsylvania was going to be a swing state. Now, we all know what happened. Of course, Hillary did lose Pennsylvania and many of the other swing states, and Trump won. The election left me with this feeling at the time, that no matter what I did, how hard I worked, it didn't count. It didn't count because 2 decades into my career, I realized that my work didn't really alleviate suffering for the world's poorest. It didn't count because my efforts back home didn't really make a difference towards what I thought would be a better election outcome for America. It didn't count, not enough anyway. But still, I'm not okay with this because I'm not I don't give up on stuff. I still wanted to do something, but what? What does count? And what counts at this moment? And what could I do differently? Then one sunny spring day after the elections and after Trump's inauguration, I went to a Michael's store to pick up arts and crafts for my then 4-year-old nephew. I went in, grabbed some paints, some canvases, some paintbrushes. Then I walked towards the register to pay. As I neared to queue up, I noticed this woman standing to the right of the row of the registers near the exit. She looked at first like familiar. She reminded me of the Salvadoran women where I lived for 3 years. She had this long dark hair, she was dark-skinned, short, a little heavy. As I looked at her, though, I noticed that she was focused on her 2 children standing at the register paying. She had this worried look on her face, but she didn't approach them. And then I remembered. She reminded me of my mother. For years after my family and we immigrated to America, the same scene played out for us weekend after weekend. There were weekends where my father couldn't, he had work, and so he couldn't come with us to go shopping. And so my mother would take us, me and my siblings, to the store to pick up groceries, clothes, whatever. And then my mother would give us money to pay, cash. She would give us cash to pay. And then she would stand close to the register, about 10 to 20 feet away from the register, just watching us. You see, my mother and my mother alone lived as an undocumented immigrant for under a decade. Similar to the Central American woman, she also didn't speak much English. This woman wore the same anxious look as my mother did decades ago. That look where you just hope no one notices you, even though she was screaming inside for someone to know and understand her story. That she didn't get to finish middle school so that she could help support her family. Or that upon deciding with my father that our whole family would immigrate to the US, she went and aborted her 4th pregnancy. And then she divorced my father and stood in front of Hong Kong courts to waive all custody claim over me and my siblings so that we could immigrate legally with my father while she would immigrate illegally alone. My mother to this day suffers from anxiety because back in those days, she would be afraid. What if she stepped outside the front door? Her story and her fate might change. As do I and my siblings suffer from anxiety from those years because what if my mother was picked up by immigration authorities while we were standing at the register in line paying? What would we do? Who would we call? Who would care? We didn't know about ACLU back then. We certainly didn't have cell phones anyways, or whether we come home one day from school to find our mom gone. What would I tell my baby brother? About a month ago, after our parents told us that they were going to go to Canada for a long weekend, my sister and I, when we were finishing up dinner and she and I, we were cleaning up, she whispered in my ear and said, "Let's tell Mom not to go. She's still on her green card." What happened in November 2016, while it broke me, it also changed me. After the elections, I became curious this time about America. I went searching for answers as to what was going on in my country that I didn't know and in my community. I learned that there's 11 cities and 2 counties in New Jersey having higher lead levels than Flint, Michigan. This now resonated for me. I began to see also that what's happening in Washington fits within global narratives of failing states. It was also curiosity that helped me connect my story with the story of the Central American woman and the many women, men, and children who live in the shadows every day in America with fear and anxiety. I know well their suffering. So here's what I've learned since I started becoming more active in my community. You see, when I saw problems to be out there, it was like I'm this superhero flying in to solve world problems. When I see now that problems are actually in my community, I cannot help but wonder and then realize that I might be part of the problem. I'm not talking about me doing anything terrible. I'm talking about doing nothing. Of not living by the values that were already within me, or of thinking that problems are others alone and not mine. These were always my problems too. But it's also this time, this work, being on stage today that has become part of my story of becoming, of embracing my own immigration story, helping me find my way home and my belonging. You guys, thank you so much.